Okay, chapter 9. So it's page 65, if you're not already there. Okay, guys, you don't need to have your Chromebooks open. Close them so you're not distracted. And let's get on page 65. Okay, chapter 9. Ben Ross wasn't quite sure what to make of the wave. What had begun as a simple history experiment had become a fad that was spreading outside his classroom. As a result, some unexpected things had started to occur. For one, the size of his daily history class was beginning to expand as students from free periods, study halls, and lunch came to be part of the wave. The recruiting of more students for the wave had apparently been far more successful than he had ever expected. So successful, in fact, that Ben began to suspect that some students were cutting other classes to sit in on his. Remarkably enough, though, even with the larger class size and the students' insistence on practicing the salute and motto, the class was not falling behind. If anything, they were covering their assigned lessons even faster than usual. Using the rapid question and answer style that the wave had inspired, they had quickly covered Japan's entrance to World War II. Ben noticed a marked improvement in preparation for class and in class participation, but he also noticed that there was less thinking behind the preparation. His students could glibly spit back answers as if by rote, but there was no analysis, no questioning on their part. In a way, he could not fault them because he himself had introduced them to the waves of the wave. It was just another unexpected development in the experiment. Ben reasoned that the students realized that to neglect their studies would be detrimental to the wave. The only way they could have time to spend on the wave was to be so well prepared that they only needed half the regular class to cover their assigned lessons. But he wasn't certain this was something to be pleased about. The class's homework assignments had improved, but rather than long, thoughtful answers, they wrote short ones. On a multiple choice test, they might all do well, but Ben had his doubts about how they do on an exam consisting of essays. To add to the interesting developments in his experiment was a report he heard that David Collins and his friends Eric and Brian had successfully infused a wave into the school's football team. Over the years, Norm Schiller, the biology teacher who also coached the school's football team, had become so soured by wisecracks about the team's continual losses that during football season he practically went months without speaking to another teacher. But that morning in the faculty lounge, Norm had actually thanked him for introducing the wave to his students. Would wonders never cease? On his own, Ben had tried to find out what it was that attracted students to the wave. Some of those he asked said it was just something new and different, like any fad. Others said that they liked the democracy of it, the fact that they were all equals now. It pleased Ross to hear that answer. He enjoyed thinking that he had helped break down the petty popularity contests and cliques that he felt often preoccupied too much of his students' thinking and energy. A few students even said they thought the idea of increased discipline was good for them. That had surprised Ben. Over the years, discipline had become an increasingly personal responsibility. If the students didn't do it themselves, their teachers were less and less inclined to step in. Maybe this was a mistake, Ben thought. Perhaps one of the results of his experiment would be a general rebirth of school discipline. He even daydreamed about a story in the education section of Time magazine. Discipline returns to the classroom. Teacher makes startling discovery. Lori Saunders sat on the desk in the school publications office, chewing on the end of a pen. Various members of the Gordon Grapevine staff sat on desks around her, biting their nails or chewing gum. Alex Cooper was wearing his Sony radio and was bopping to the music through his earphones. Another reporter was wearing roller skates. This was the Grapevine's excuse for a weekly editorial meeting. Okay, Lori told them, we got the same problem as usual. The paper is due out next week, but we don't have enough stories. Lori looked at the girl wearing roller skates. Jeannie, you were supposed to do a fashion story on the latest clothes. Where is it? Oh, nobody's wearing anything interesting this year, Jeannie replied. It's always the same thing. Jeans and sneakers and t-shirts. Well, then write about how there are no new styles this year, Lori said. Then she turned to the reporter who was bopping to his radio. Alex. Alex kept bopping. He couldn't hear her. Alex, Lori said more loudly. Finally, someone near Alex gave him a nudge. He looked up startled. Yeah? Lori rolled her eyes. Alex, this is supposed to be an editorial meeting. Really? Alex replied. Okay, so where's your record review for this issue? Oh, yeah, record review. Right, yeah, Alex said. Well, you see, it's a long story. Like I was going to do it, but, remember that trip I said I had to take to Argentina? Lori rolled her eyes again. Well, it fell through, Alex said, and I had to go to Hong Kong instead. Lori turned to Alex's sidekick, Carl. I suppose you had to go to Hong Kong with him? She said sarcastically. Carl shook his head. No, he replied seriously. I made the trip to Argentina as scheduled. I see, said Lori. She looked around at the rest of the grapevine staff. I suppose the rest of you have been too busy hopping around the globe to get anything written as well? I went to the movies, Jeannie said. Did you write a review? Lori asked. No, it was too good, she replied. Too good? It's no fun writing reviews on good movies, she said. Yeah, said Alex, the globe hopping record reviewer. It's no fun doing a review of a good movie because you can't say anything bad about it. The only time it's fun to review something is when it's bad. Then you can tear it to shreds. Hee hee hee. Alex started rubbing his hands together as he went into his mad scientist routine. Alex had the best mad scientist routine in school. He also did a great imitation of a windsurfer in a hurricane. We need stories for the paper, Lori said resolutely. Doesn't anyone have any ideas? They got a new school bus, someone said. Whoopee! I heard that Mr. Gamboni's going on a sabbatical next year. Maybe he won't come back. Some kid in the 10th grade put his fist through a window yesterday. He was trying to prove that you could punch a hole in a window and not cut yourself. Did he do it? Nope, got 12 stitches. Hey, wait a minute, said Carl. What about this wave thing? Everyone wants to know what it is. Aren't you in Ross's history class, Lori? Another staff member asked. That's probably the biggest story in school right now, said a third. Lori nodded. She was aware that the wave was worth a story, and maybe a big story at that. A couple of days ago, it had even occurred to her that something like the wave was probably just what the sluggish, disorganized staff of the grapevine itself needed. But she had set the idea aside. She couldn't even explain her decision consciously. It was just that creepy feeling she began to get, the feeling that maybe they should be careful with the wave. So far, she'd seen it do some good in Mr. Ross's class, and David said he thought it was helping the football team. But still, she was cautious. Well, what about it, Lori? Someone asked. The wave? Lori said. How come you haven't assigned that story to us? Alex asked. Or are you just saving the good ones for yourself? I don't know if anyone knows enough about it to write about it yet, Lori said. What do you mean? You're in the wave, aren't you? Alex asked. Well, yes, I am, Lori replied, but I still don't know. A couple of the staff members scowled. While I think the grapevine still should have a story reporting that it exists at least, Carl said. I mean, a lot of kids are wondering what it is. Lori nodded. Okay, you're right. I'll try to explain what it is. But in the meantime, I want you all to do something. Since we still have a few days before the paper has to come out, try to find everything you can about what kids think of the wave. Ever since the night she had first discussed the wave with her mother and father at dinner, Lori had purposely avoided the subject at home. It didn't seem worth creating any more hassles, especially with her mother, who could find something to worry about in everything Lori did, whether it was going out late with David, chewing on a pin, or the wave. Lori just hoped her mother would forget about it. But that night, while she was studying in her room, her mother knocked on the door. Babe, can I come in? Sure, Mom. The door opened, and Mrs. Saunders stepped in, wearing a yellow terry cloth bathrobe and slippers. The skin around her eyes looked greasy, and Lori knew she'd been putting wrinkle cream on. How's it? How's their crow's feet, Mom? She asked in good-natured humor. Mrs. Saunders smiled wryly at her daughter. Someday, she said, wagging a finger, someday you won't think it's so funny. She walked over to the desk and peered over her daughter's shoulder at the book she was reading. Shakespeare? What did you expect? Lori asked. Well, anything except the wave, Mrs. Saunders said, sitting down on her daughter's bed. Lori turned to look at her. What do you mean, Mom? Only that I met Elaine Billings at the supermarket today, and she told me Robert is a completely new person. Was she worried? No, she wasn't, but I am, Mrs. Saunders said. You know they've been having problems with him for years. Elaine has talked to me frequently about it. She's been very worried. Lori nodded. So she's ecstatic about this sudden change, Mrs. Saunders said, but somehow I don't trust it. Such a dramatic personality change, it almost sounds like he's joined a cult or something. What do you mean? Lori, if you study the types of people who join these cults, they're almost always people who are unhappy with themselves and their lives. They look at the cult as a way of changing, of starting over, of literally being born again. How else do you explain the change in Robert? But what's wrong with that, Mom? The problem is that it's not real, Lori. Robert is safe only as long as he keeps within the confines of the wave. But what do you think happens when he leaves it? The outside world doesn't know or care about the wave. If Robert couldn't function in school before the wave, he wouldn't be able to function outside of school where the wave doesn't exist. Lori understood. Well, you don't have to worry about me, Mom. I don't think I'm as crazy about it as I was a couple days ago. Mrs. Saunders nodded. No, I didn't think you would be, once you thought about it for a while. So what's the problem? Lori asked. The problem is everyone else at school who still takes it seriously, her mother said. Oh, Mom, you're the one who's taking this too seriously. Do you want to know what I think? I think it's just a fad. It's like punk rock or something. In 2 months, no one will even remember what the wave was. Mrs. Billings told me that they're organizing a wave rally for Friday afternoon, Mrs. Saunders said. It's just a pep rally for the football games on Saturday, Lori explained. The only difference is they're calling it a wave rally instead of a pep rally at which they will formally indoctrinate 200 new members? Mrs. Saunders asked skeptically. Lori sighed. Mom, listen to me. You're really getting paranoid about this whole thing. Nobody's indoctrinating anyone. They're going to welcome new members to the wave at the rally. Those people would have to come to the pep rally anyway. Really, Mom, the wave is just a game. It's like little boys playing soldier. I wish you could meet Mr. Ross because then you'd see there's nothing to worry about. He's such a good teacher. He'd never get to anything like a cult. And you're not disturbed by it all? Mrs. Saunders asked. Mom, the only thing that disturbs me is that so many kids in my class could allow themselves to get caught up in something so immature. I mean, I guess I can understand why David's into it. He's convinced that it's going to turn the football team into a winner. But it's Amy I can't understand. I mean, well, you know Amy. She's so bright, and yet I see her taking this so seriously. So you are worried, her mother said. But Lori shook her head. No, Mom, that's the only thing that bothers me. And that isn't much. I promise you, Mom. This is a molehill and you're looking for a mountain. Really, trust me. Mrs. Saunders rose slowly. Well, all right, Lori. At least I know you're not involved in this situation. I suppose that's enough to be thankful for. But please, babe, be careful. She leaned over, kissed her daughter on the forehead, and left the room. For a few minutes, Lori sat at her desk, but did not go back to her homework. Instead, she chewed on a big pen and thought about her mother's concerns. She really was blowing it way out of proportion, wasn't she? It was really just a fad, wasn't it? Chapter 10. Ben Ross was having coffee in the faculty lounge when someone came in and told him Principal Owens wanted to see him in his office. Ross felt a tremor of nervousness. Had something gone wrong? If Owens wanted to see him, it had to be about the wave. Ross stepped out into the hall and started down towards the principal's office. On the way, more than a dozen students paused to give him the wave salute. He returned them and continued quickly, wondering what Owens was going to say. In one sense, if Owen was going to tell him that there had been complaints and that he should stop the experiment, Ross knew he would feel some relief. Honestly, he had never expected the wave to spread this far. The news that the kids in other classes, kids in other grades even, had gotten into the wave still amazed him. He simply hadn't intended it to be anything like this. And yet, there was another consideration. The so-called losers in the class, Robert Billings, for example. For the first time in his life, Robert was an equal, a member, part of a group. No one was making fun of him anymore. No one was giving him a hard time. And the change in Robert was indeed remarkable. Not only had his appearance improved, but he was starting to contribute. For the first time, he was an active member of his class, and it wasn't just history. Christy said she was noticing it in music too. Robert seemed like a new person. To end the wave might mean returning Robert to the role of class creep and taking away the only chance he had. And would it ending the experiment now also treat the other students who were taking part in it? Ben wondered. They would be left hanging without a chance to see where it would eventually lead them, and he would lose the chance to lead them there. Ben abruptly stopped. Hey, wait a minute. Since when was he leading them anywhere? This was a classroom experiment, remember? An opportunity for his students to get a taste of what life in Nazi Germany might have been like. Ross smiled to himself. Let's not get carried away, he thought, and continued down the hall. Principal Owen's door was open, and when he saw Ben Ross enter the anteroom, he motioned him in a wave. Ben was slightly confused. On the way down to the office, he somehow convinced himself that Principal Owens was going to chew him out, but the old man appeared to be in a good mood. Principal Owens was a towering man who stood over 6 feet 4 inches. His head was almost completely bald except for a few tufts of hair above either ear. His only other noteworthy feature was his pipe, always present, which protruded from his lips. He had a deep voice, and when he was angry, he might instill instant religion in the most hardened atheists. But today it seemed as if Ben had nothing to fear. Principal Owen sat behind his desk, his large black shoes propped up on one corner, and squinted slightly at Ben. Say, Ben, that's a good-looking suit, he said. Owens himself had never been seen around Gordon High in less than a three-piece, even at a Saturday football game. Thank you, sir, Ben replied nervously. Principal Owen smiled. Can't recall seeing you in one before. Yes, this is something new for me, Ben allowed. One of the principal's eyebrows rose. Wouldn't have anything to do with this wave thing, would it? Ben had to clear his throat. Well, yes, it does, actually. Bill Owens leaned forward. Now tell me, Ben, what's this wave thing is all about, he said. You got the school in a tizzy. Well, I hope it's a good tizzy, Ben Ross replied. Principal Owens rubbed his chin. From what I heard it is. Have you heard differently? Ben knew he had to reassure him. He quickly shook his head. No, sir, I've heard nothing. The principal nodded. I'm all ears, Ben. Ben took a deep breath and began. It started several days ago in my senior history class. We were watching a film about the Nazis, and when he finished explaining the wave, Ben noticed that Principal Owens looked less happy than before, but not as noticeably displeased as Ben had feared he might be. The principal removed his pipe from between his lips and tapped it on the ashtray. I must say it's unusual, Ben. Are you sure that the students are not falling behind? If anything, they're ahead, Ben replied. But there are students outside your class that are now involved with this. But there have been no complaints, Ben said. In fact, Christy says she's even noticed an improvement in her classes because of it. This was a slight exaggeration, Ben knew, but he also felt it was necessary because Owens was overreacting to the wave. Still, Ben, these mottos and this saluting bother me, the principal said. It shouldn't. It's just part of the game. And also, Norm Schiller. Yes, I know, Owen said, cutting him short. He was in here yesterday raving about this thing. He says it's literally turned that football team of his around. The way he was talking, Ben, you would have thought he just drafted 6 future Heisman Trophy winners. Frankly, I'd just like to see them beat Clarkstown on Saturday. The principal paused momentarily and then said, But that's not what I'm concerned about, Ben. I'm concerned about the students. This wave thing seems too open-ended for my liking. I know you haven't broken any rules, but there are limits. I'm completely aware of that, Ben insisted. You have to understand that this experiment can't go any further than I let it go. The whole basis for the wave is the idea of a group willing to follow their leader. And as long as I'm involved in this, I assure you it can't get out of hand. Principal Owens refilled his pipe with fresh tobacco and lit it. For a moment, disappearing behind a small cloud of smoke while he considered Ben's words. Okay, he said, to be perfectly frank about it, it's so different from anything we've ever had around here that I'm not sure what to think. I say let's keep an eye on this thing, Ben, and keep your ears open too. Remember, Ben, this experiment, if that's what you want to call it, involves young, impressionable kids. Sometimes we forget that they are young and haven't developed the judgment we hope they'll someday have. Sometimes they can take something too far if they're not watched. Understand? Absolutely. You promise me I'm not going to have a parade of parents down here suddenly shouting that we're indoctrinating their kids with something. I promise, Ben said. Principal Owens nodded slightly. Well, I can't say that I'm crazy about this, but you've never given me cause to doubt you before, and I won't now, Ben told him. Okay.